and welcome to the very first and very last episode of Soapy History. Since no one will ever be watching this channel again, enjoy this lovely copyrighted indie cowboy music I have for you. More is to come. This will also be a rather short episode due to strict class requirements, so if you want to check out the full version, I apologize because it will never exist.
I'm also going to speed this up just a touch.
Winnegoon did a great video on this topic, though. He goes into lots more detail than I'm going to, and he also talks about how this ties into the JFK assassination, etc. So, shout out to Winnegoon. Okay. Anyway, to the meat, or rather, the blood. So, the U.S.'s intervention and occupation in the Philippines is a pretty overlooked part of our history. The U.S. started showing interest in the Philippines during the Spanish-American War, or I guess before that, and later the Philippine-American War, and they were eventually able to purchase the islands from Spain for a cool $20 million. And while there were many issues within this occupation, what I'll be talking about will regard intervention following World War II, when the United States Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, faked a series of attacks, one specifically involving a vampire, to scare their enemies and put down a rebellion. Here's some fun copyrighted jazz music, because it's the late 40s.
Alright, we're going to take a short little break and hear from today's sponsor, which is also today's hippie.
So right here, you can't see it, but there's a black and white picture of a Filipino man standing in a doorway, and there's a cross on the doorway, and the caption reads, "When Robert Ripley visited the Philippines in 1932, people protected their homes with sacred signs." For context, this is when the Philippines was still under U.S. control, and it was taken around 2 decades before the conflict I'm going to be talking about began. The intended audience of this photo was Americans and other Westerners who didn't know what was going on during this occupation. The purpose was to portray the superstition that Filipinos believed in, showing their vulnerability to psychological manipulation in the future. Finally, the point of view of this photo is from an inquisitive American eager to learn more about rural Filipino culture. In the end, these psychological attacks set the course of the Cold War, particularly U.S. involvement in Asia.
Alright, there's your hippie Mrs. Mize. Now back to the story.
This story will center around a group known as the Hukbalahap, which was a Filipino insurgent group formed to resist Japanese control. They fought alongside American soldiers to defeat Japan. They were a crucial ally, and this group was mainly made up of poor peasant farmers. When the war ended, the Philippines were able to gain their independence, so they were no longer under the control of Spain, Japan, or the United States. But the U.S. still wanted to take advantage of the economic opportunities that were available on the islands. Timber, minerals, and oil were abundant, but the country was very poor, not to mention their infrastructure had been largely destroyed by the raging conflict that was World War II. It looked like the perfect time to make a treaty. The Bell Trade Act was passed by Congress in 1946, which gave the Philippines $800 million in aid. In exchange, the U.S. gained free trade rights for 12 years and was able to operate companies on the islands, which was actually previously illegal. The U.S. was also able to maintain their military bases located in the Philippines, as they had before. Unfortunately, the Huks, or the Hukbalahap, were beginning an uprising. To the insurgents, it looked like they were once again giving up control of their homeland to wealthy power. President Manuel Roxas had barred the Huks from the Filipino government, believing that they were standing in the way of a valuable economic deal. So, in turn, the Huk rebellion targeted both Roxas and U.S. forces residing in the Philippines. The result would be a series of attacks that prove history can be stranger than fiction. The insurgency was becoming sort of a communist revolution, seeking to diminish the power of wealthy landowners. The Huks weren't specifically tied to the Soviet Union, but they were seen as a more communist-leaning group, I suppose just because they wanted to take power away from the wealthy. This gave the U.S. a pretty good reason to intervene. Now, directly sending in troops to fight wasn't really an option. It would have been very unpopular, so recently after World War II. So instead of deploying military forces to quell the rebellions, the CIA was sent in. The goal was to use more psychological tactics to defeat the rebellions instead of direct military force. So Edward Lansdale, a former Air Force pilot and a psychological warfare expert, was the man with the plan. He knew that the majority of Huks were poor farmers, uneducated, religious, and very superstitious, according to Ripley's. So as an expert in psychological warfare, he had the perfect strategy to exploit their beliefs and put down the rebellion. There was a common belief in rural Filipino culture of a creature known as the aswang, which, in simplified terms, was a vampire. It was some kind of demonic spirit or being that would target rural Filipinos and suck their blood before killing them. The group of Huks that the CIA was targeting were stationed on a strategic hill. Lansdale and his men somehow got a rumor circulating that an Aswang was spotted roaming around this very hill, and that initially freaked out the Huks a little bit, but they didn't pay it too much mind. Until, one night, CIA agents abducted a Huk and pierced his neck with a sharp object before hanging him upside down and draining him of all his blood, Poor guy. The next morning, they threw the body out in the trail, so all the other Hucks saw it, and surprisingly, they were actually terrified. They saw this as an attack by the Aswang, and they fled the hill. There were other methods that the CIA used, including painting eyes everywhere and yelling curses out of a low-flying plane. But to quote the Special Operations Forces report, that and the combination of logistical and factional problems caused the Hucks to fracture and split internally. When the CIA noticed the psychological tactic was working, they combined it with a more intense search and destroy operation. So in the end, as you may imagine, the US won this little conflict in the Philippines. And it really goes to show the extent the US was willing to go to put down communism, even this early in the Cold War. Psychological warfare was crucial for the US in this early stage of the war, and it allowed them to gain an initial advantage over emerging communist forces, and tactics kind of similar to this would be used later in Vietnam. And yeah, it's really interesting. So hope you enjoyed my podcast, and tune in never again. See ya.
Shout out to Windagoon for inspiring me to look into this topic in the first place. And then my sources from Ripley's and SoFrep, also my copyrighted music, Rogue by Coperman, Evergreens by Charlie Barnett, and of course 1989 Belgian techno anthem, Pump Up the Jam.
Pump it up while your feet are stumping, and the jam is pumping. Look ahead, the crowd is jumping. Pump it up a little more, get the party going on the dance floor. See, cause that's where the party's at, and you find out if you do that.